The Tide Witness Crescent. The first thing the sea taught me was that truth has weight. A net doesn't care what story you tell about your hands. If your knot is wrong, the water will find it. My mother taught me the second lesson. Promises are lighter than air until someone forces them to sink. She taught it on the night the storm unzipped our roof and the harbor sirens wailed like metal animals. She was already coughing blood into a towel, already gone in the slow, bureaucratic way. Sickness steals you, but she still climbed the stairs to the attic and pried a tin box from behind a beam. Inside lay a crescent of pale jade, thin as a fingernail clipping and cold as a coin left in winter. She pressed it into my palm and wrapped my fingers around it with the stubborn strength of someone refusing to be a memory. "Mina," she said, using my full name like an anchor. If someone swears under open sky, the crescent can make the words heavy. It does not punish ordinary lies. It answers oaths made to the sky, but every weight you add to another person's promise must come from somewhere. You will feel it in your senses. Decide carefully what you can afford to lose. Then she kissed my forehead, tasted like salt and medicine, and sent me back down to the kitchen as if nothing supernatural had just been passed, like an heirloom between two women who had no property to inherit. I was 19 then, living in Breakwater City, a port built from rust and optimism on the edge of a warming ocean. My mother, Etta Cade, had been a tide engineer for the Coastal Barrier Project until her lungs gave out. My father was a photograph I kept face down in a drawer because it hurt less that way. When my mother died 3 months later, the barrier sirens sang again. Not for a storm, but for a budget vote that failed. For water rising through the cracks of politics. I took the crescent on a chain and wore it under my wetsuit, where it rested against my sternum like a cold punctuation mark in the sentence of my life. I told myself it was only jewelry. Only grief. Only something to touch when the city's news feeds got too loud. But the crescent had its own quiet appetite, and it listened whenever the sky heard someone swear. I became a salvage diver because the sea paid in quick cash and honest danger. You know what you're risking underwater. It is listed on your gauges. On land, risk is hidden in contracts and smiles. My crew was small. Juno Rell, who could fix an engine with a hairpin and an insult. Ose Varga, whose laugh was too big for his body. And an old drone buoy we'd reprogrammed, Nora, who sang to us in clipped radio bursts whenever our oxygen dropped. We worked for whoever hired us. Fishermen who lost traps, shipyards that needed bolts recovered, research labs that dropped sensors. We had rules, no weapons, no cargo we wouldn't describe to a regulator, no jobs that smelled like traffickers. Rules, of course, are what you swear just before someone offers you enough money to forget them. The offer that broke our rules came from a company called Asterian Maritime, and it came with a man who smiled like he'd practiced in a mirror that never challenged him. His name was Calder Wren, and he met us in a coffee shop with windows facing the harbor, so you could watch the water while you signed away your caution. Calder wore a suit that pretended it belonged on a boat, and his hands were spotless in a city where clean hands meant you didn't work. He laid a tablet on the table, slid it toward me, and said, "We lost a research capsule during a storm. Proprietary. Sensitive. We need it recovered quietly." The pay number made Juno whistle. It also made my crescent warm faintly under my shirt, as if it recognized the shape of the pitch. Money as anesthesia. I asked for details. Calder's eyes flicked to my collarbone, without understanding what he was seeing. "Depth, coordinates, hazards," I said. "And why you can't use your own divers." Calder smiled. "Legal entanglements," he said softly. "Nothing for you to worry about." Then he lifted his right hand, palm up, as if offering a truth. "I swear," he said. "This job harms no one. It's just equipment." The crescent snapped hot against my sternum, not painful but sharp, like a static shock through bone. My breath caught. That was the first time I felt it move, and it felt like the sea tugging a rope in my ribs. I didn't grant anything. I didn't even know how. I just stared at Calder and felt a familiar anger rise, anger at the casualness with which powerful people decorated their requests with oaths. He saw my hesitation and softened his voice. "Your mother worked on the barrier," he said. "We respected her. We want to fund a memorial stipend in her name. I swear we're the good guys here." The crescent burned hotter. The sky outside the coffee shop was overcast, but still sky. Oaths did not need sun. They needed open air. Juno kicked my boot under the table, a silent warning. We needed money. We always needed money, but I could not stop thinking about my mother's last advice. You will feel it in your senses. Decide what you can afford to lose. I signed the contract anyway because I was 19 and the city had taught me that ethics without rent is a hobby. I told myself I would control the job. I told myself I would walk away if it smelled wrong. I told myself, for the first time, a lie that sounded like an oath, even without the words, I can handle this. The coordinates led to the old channel, a stretch of water outside the newer barrier where sunken debris made a graveyard of steel ribs. We launched at dawn. The sky was the color of wet paper. Nora pinged happily as if she didn't know the ocean could be cruel. Underwater, the world was green and muffled, full of particulate glitter. At 40 meters, my ears popped. At 60, the pressure hugged my chest like a hand. We found the capsule wedged beneath a collapsed pier section, half buried in silt. It was the size of a suitcase, matte black, with a faint triangle logo etched into one corner. Asterian's symbol. Or maybe someone else's. I signaled to Juno, attached a lift bag, and we began the slow ascent. That's when a second capsule drifted into view behind the first smaller, with vent slits. It pulsed faint red, like a heartbeat. My stomach tightened. Research equipment doesn't pulse like a heartbeat. Nora's radio chirp sharpened. Warning, heat source. I reached out, fingers trembling in thick gloves, and brushed the smaller capsule. It was warm. Warm underwater means alive or dangerous. I backed away and waved Juno off. On my way up, I caught a glimpse of a symbol on the warm capsule. Not Asterian's triangle, but a crescent crossed by a line, like a moon with a scar. My own crescent on my chest felt suddenly heavier, as if it had heard a cousin call its name through water. Back on deck, Osei helped haul the black capsule aboard. It hissed as air met its seals. Calder's boat arrived 10 minutes later, too quick for coincidence. Calder climbed aboard with 2 men who did not look like research staff. He smiled at us, then at the capsule, like a man greeting a long-lost pet. Perfect, he said. I pointed to the triangle logo and asked, "What is it?" Calder's smile didn't change, but something in his eyes cooled. "A sensor array," he said. "You did your job." I told him about the second capsule, the warm one with the scarred crescent. Calder's eyes narrowed. "There was only one," he said. "I'm sure you imagined something." Then he placed his hand on the black capsule and said, loudly, for the benefit of the harbor wind, "I swear to you, Mina Cade, there was only one capsule, and it was harmless." The crescent on my chest flared like a brand. The heat was so sudden I gasped. My vision whitened at the edges. I knew, with a certainty that was not rational, that he had lied under oath. The open sky took note. The crescent heard him. All it wanted was my permission to make his words heavy enough to drag him under. That night, after Calder's boat left with the capsule and the cash transfer hit our account like a moral bribe, I couldn't sleep. The crescent lay on my palm. Cold now, innocent looking. I remembered my mother's phrase. "Make the words heavy." I tried to imagine how. I whispered into my cramped bathroom, because bathrooms are where you confess to yourself. If he swore and lied, let his oath become weight. The crescent warmed immediately, like it had been waiting. The air thickened. My ears rang, not from sound but from absence, as if the world had pulled a blanket over itself. Then pain shot through my inner ear, and the room pitched. I fell to the tile. In the seconds before blackout, I heard something like a tide moving backward. I woke on the floor with my cheek stuck to cold grout, and my ears roaring with silence. Not tinnitus worse. The world was muted, as if someone had stuffed cotton into my skull. I clapped my hands. The sound was distant, underwater. Panic rose. I crawled to the sink, stared at my face, and realized my mother had meant it literally. "You will feel it in your senses." I had paid with hearing, not all of it, but enough to make the city's alarms feel far away. I staggered to my room and texted Juno. "Can you hear okay?" She replied instantly. "Yeah. Why?" I stared at the crescent, now cool and smug. Somewhere, Calder Wren's oath had become heavy. I didn't know what that meant yet, but I knew my ears had been used as currency. The effect arrived 2 days later in the form of a public catastrophe. Asterian Maritime held a press conference on a floating platform and announced a new philanthropic initiative, the Tide Relief Fund, promising free repairs for low-income homes after floods. Calder Wren stood on the platform, smiling at cameras, and swore into a microphone that Asterion would never profit from disaster. The crescent warmed against my skin even through layers of clothing. Then, as Calder finished the oath, he stiffened. His smile froze. He gripped the podium like it might float away. His mouth opened, and instead of the next rehearsed sentence, a different voice came out his, but dragged by invisible weight. "We already profit," he said, choking. "We bid on repairs we cause." The crowd murmured. Calder's eyes went wide with terror. He tried to correct himself, but the words that followed were not corrections. They were confessions, spilling out like water through a crack. The capsule tracks barrier stress points. We weaken zones, then sell relief contracts. We call it resilience. Cameras zoomed. People gasped. Calder's security tried to pull him away, but he kept speaking, as if his oath had turned his own throat into a ballast stone. The confession went viral within minutes. By evening, regulators raided Asterian's offices, and protesters flooded the harbor, chanting for arrests. Juno watched the feed with me and said, very softly, "Mina, what did you do?" I shook my head because I truly didn't know how wide the crescent's ripples could go. "I didn't mean for it to be this," I said. My voice sounded muffled to me, as if the words were trapped behind glass. The sea outside our window slapped the pilings like applause or warning. With Asterion in chaos, our name became toxic by proximity. Jobs dried up overnight. People who had never known us suddenly knew us as those divers. My hearing recovered slightly over a week, like a bruise fading, but it never returned fully. Sounds stayed softened, as if the world refused to be sharp around me. That should have been enough to teach me restraint. But the warm capsule haunted me, the scarred crescent symbol, the pulse. When we went back to the old channel on our own, the warm capsule was gone. Someone else had retrieved it. Someone who knew it existed. Someone who had lied about it under open sky. The crescent on my chest warmed whenever I thought about the scarred symbol, like it recognized kin. The thought made my skin prickle. My mother's artifact was not unique. Artifacts are never unique. They are tools, and tools travel. 3 weeks after Calder's confession, a woman visited our dock with a raincoat and a face that looked like she had learned to survive by refusing to be impressed. She introduced herself as Dr. Celine Marr, from the Coastal Integrity Commission, and she carried a tablet full of subpoenas. "Your crew recovered a capsule for Asterian Maritime," she said. "You were paid. That makes you witnesses." Juno crossed her arms. "We were contractors," she snapped. "We didn't know." Dr. Marr's eyes flicked to my chest, not with recognition of the crescent, but with the practiced observation of someone who hunts patterns. "Maybe," she said, "but we have a larger problem. Asterian is not alone. The barrier has been failing in ways that don't match natural stress. Someone is manipulating it." She leaned closer. "Tell me about the second capsule." I hesitated. Truth in a courtroom is one thing. Truth in a dockside conversation with a federal commission is another. But my mother's voice whispered in my memory. "Truth has weight." I told Dr. Marr everything. When I mentioned the scarred crescent symbol, her expression shifted by a fraction. "A crescent," she repeated, "with a line through it." I nodded. Dr. Marr's jaw tightened. "Then we are not dealing with ordinary sabotage," she said. "We are dealing with a consortium that uses oath tech." I blinked. "Oath tech?" I echoed. She watched my face as if gauging whether I was lying or ignorant. "Devices designed to bind spoken commitments," she said. "They exist. They're old and new at once. They can make people comply with what they swear. The Commission has been tracking rumors for years, but we've never found a source." Her eyes narrowed, until Calder confessed like a man drowning in his own words. "That night, Doctor, Marr sent me a secure file. It contained old footage, a mayor swearing to protect housing, then turning pale and resigning mid-speech. A corporate lawyer swearing a contract was clean, then vomiting and blurting hidden clauses. A fisherman swearing he saw nothing, then collapsing and naming coordinates. The pattern was consistent. Oaths under open sky, turning into involuntary truth or forced alignment. At the bottom of the file was the same scarred crescent symbol, labeled Tied Witness, unconfirmed. I stared at my own crescent and felt suddenly like a thief holding a key to a lock I didn't understand. My mother had given me a clause. Other people had built an industry around clauses. That was the difference between inheritance and infrastructure. Dr. Marr offered me a deal that sounded like a confession disguised as employment. "Work with us," she messaged. We can protect you, help you manage side effects, and use your asset to expose the consortium. The word asset made my throat tighten. The crescent warmed faintly, as if it disliked being named. I didn't trust commissions. Commissions were where responsibility went to die politely. But I also didn't trust myself alone. Juno wanted to say no. Osei wanted to say yes because he believed in heroic narratives. Nora just chirped and flashed low battery warnings like a grandmother nagging you to eat. In the end, I said yes on one condition. No secrecy from my crew. Dr. Marr agreed. She didn't swear. That, paradoxically, made her feel more trustworthy. We began with data, not magic. We mapped barrier stress, anomalies, shipping routes, repair bids. The pattern formed a shape that looked, from above, like a spiral, stress points weakening in sequence to force the city into emergency procurement, which bypassed oversight and funneled contracts to a network of shell companies. Asterion had been one node. There were others. Lumen Harbor Works, Meridian Relief, Skybond Insurance. The consortium's symbol, the triangle, appeared in ownership records like a watermark. The scarred crescent symbol appeared only in whispers. In an internal memo, Dr. Marr obtained from a whistleblower. Listener risk mitigation requires decoy oaths. Listener. That word hit me like cold water. Someone out there was listening for oaths the way my crescent listened. Someone expected listeners. Someone was managing us as a risk category. The whistleblower's name was Ezra Pike, a procurement analyst who had quit Skybond Insurance after a panic attack during a board meeting. Dr. Marr arranged a meeting in an open-air park because she believed sunlight was better than walls. I arrived wearing my crescent under a scarf and felt it warm as soon as Ezra sat down. Ezra looked like a man who had been used as a spreadsheet cell. Thin, pale, jittery. He kept glancing at the sky, as if expecting it to judge him. I shouldn't be here, he whispered. They'll find me. Dr. Marr spoke calmly. We can relocate you, she said. Ezra shook his head. You can't relocate me from my own head, he said. Then he looked at me, eyes desperate. Are you the one? He asked. I frowned. The one what? Ezra swallowed. The listener, he said. The crescent warmed hotter. My pulse spiked. Ezra leaned forward. They said if a listener appears, you offer them a contract. You make them swear loyalty. And if they refuse, you bury them in noise. Dr. Marr's eyes sharpened. Who said that? She asked. Ezra hesitated. A man named Harlan Silt, he said. He runs the consortium's enforcement arm. Harlan Silt. The name sounded like something you'd find under your nails. Ezra continued. He swore in the meeting under the skylight, he swore the barrier failures were natural. And then, he laughed, like the oath was a joke. The crescent on my chest snapped hot, sudden and violent. Ezra flinched. Did you feel that? He asked. I forced my voice steady. What else do you know? I asked. Ezra pulled a flash drive from his pocket and held it out like an offering. Invoices, email chains, the spiral plan, he whispered. But I need one thing. He looked at the sky and then at me. I need someone to make him swear again, he said. I need the oath to trap him, because he's too careful on paper. Dr. Marr's jaw tightened. We don't do vigilantism, she said. Ezra laughed, short and bitter. You do bureaucracy, he said. He eats bureaucracy. Then he looked at me with the kind of hope that feels like pressure. Please, he said. If you can make oaths heavy, make his heavy enough to sink the whole spiral. The crescent warmed, hungry. My hearing fuzzed slightly, a warning itch. I thought of my mother's voice. Decide carefully what you can afford to lose. My hearing had been the first payment. What would the next be? Sight? Balance? Taste? I imagined a life where I couldn't hear the sea, couldn't see it, couldn't feel it. But I also imagined a life where Breakwater City drowned while executives swore it was nature. I took the flash drive. We'll try, I said. Not an oath. A sentence. A bridge built without sky witnessing. Ezra exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for months. To reach Harlan Silt, we needed bait. Dr. Marr arranged a public hearing about barrier failures and invited representatives from insurers and contractors. Harlan attended because men like him attend when they want to control the narrative. The hearing was held on the rooftop of City Hall, a deliberate choice. Open sky, wind, cameras. The crescent warmed the moment I stepped onto the roof. as if it smelled oaths waiting in the air. Harlan Silt was shorter than I expected, with hair slicked back and eyes that looked bored by morality. He wore a gray coat like a uniform. When he spoke, he did not smile. "Failures are due to unprecedented storm activity," he said. "No human malfeasance." Dr. Marr asked pointed questions. He answered smoothly. Then a council member demanded, "Do you swear your companies did not manipulate barrier stress points for profit?" The crowd murmured. Harlan's eyes flicked across the rooftop and landed on me, as if he could feel the crescent's warmth through my scarf. He looked amused. He lifted his hand and said clearly, "I swear, under this open sky, our consortium has never harmed Breakwater City." The crescent slammed hot. The world muffled. My balance wavered. Behind Harlan, the sky looked too bright, as if it had become a witness stand. He had sworn big too big because he believed he could define harm through legal loopholes. The clause inside my crescent didn't care about his definitions. It cared about his oath and my permission. I didn't grant permission immediately. I had learned the first rule of dangerous tools: pause. Harlan watched me, eyes glittering. It was as if he expected me to react, expected a listener to do what listeners do. In that pause, I realized he might be baiting me the way you bait a shark, not to get bitten, but to see the shadow move. If I invoked the crescent on a rooftop full of cameras, the consequences could be spectacular and therefore traceable. That would help Dr. Marr's case, but it would also put a target on my chest. Harlan leaned closer to the microphone and added, softer, "And I swear anyone claiming otherwise is either mistaken or malicious." The crescent burned. He was threading a second oath to preempt whistleblowers. Ezra sat in the audience, pale, hands clenched. I felt the city's wind press against my face like a plea. I made a choice that was not heroic, only precise. I whispered to the crescent, inside my scarf, "Make his oath heavy, but only by binding his actions to it. Let the weight become transparency, not disaster." The crescent flared. My hearing dropped another notch, as if a dimmer switch had been turned. The rooftop wobbled. I grabbed the railing and stared at the horizon until my eyes stopped spinning. Harlan's reaction was subtle at first. He blinked rapidly, like someone fighting back a sneeze. Then his throat bobbed. He cleared it and continued speaking, but his words shifted. "To reassure the public," he said, voice tightening, "we will release our full procurement communications to the Commission within 72 hours. The council erupted in surprised murmurs. Dr. Marr's eyebrows lifted. Harlan looked as if his mouth had betrayed him. He tried to pivot, to soften, to qualify, but each attempt became another trap. "We have nothing to hide," he said, and the phrase landed like a brick in his own hands. Cameras zoomed. Donors in the audience exchanged worried looks. Harlan finished his statement quickly and left the rooftop without shaking hands, coat flapping like a wounded bird. Ezra exhaled, trembling. Dr. Marr leaned toward me and whispered, "Did you?" I shook my head, but my crescent throbbed with heat, and my ears rang with emptiness. The clause had been invoked. The invoice was due. Over the next 3 days, my hearing degraded further. Not catastrophically, but enough that voices sounded like they were coming through water. I could still dive pressure, equalization still worked, but on land I started relying on subtitles and lip reading. Juno learned to tap my shoulder before speaking. Osei started exaggerating gestures like a silent film actor, which made me laugh and then cry because laughter sounded wrong now, like a memory of sound rather than sound itself. Nora's radio chirps became harder to distinguish. I felt myself grieving a sense while trying to win a city. Dr. Marr insisted we document everything. "No miracles," she said, "just evidence." The crescent didn't like the word miracle. It warmed in irritation, as if it preferred to be called a clause. I began calling it that too, because names shape how you use tools. 72 hours later, the commission received a data dump from Harlan's companies. Emails, contracts, maintenance logs, and, hidden in a folder titled Weather Models, a set of schematics for something called the Skyline Resonator. The resonator, according to the schematics, could amplify micro-vibrations in barrier pylons to weaken them selectively, creating stress failures that looked like storm damage. It was sabotage, disguised as climate. The engineers who reviewed it went pale. Dr. Marr's team moved fast, securing warrants, freezing accounts. The press called it the barrier gate scandal within an hour because naming things is the first step to controlling them. Harlan Silt's oath had become weight, dragging secrets into daylight. The city cheered. Protesters danced. And I sat in my apartment with my crescent in my palm and listened to nothing, feeling like I had traded one tide for another. The consortium did not collapse immediately because systems built on profit do not collapse. They mutate. Harlan disappeared, of course. Calder Wren was indicted and offered a plea deal. Shell companies dissolved and reformed under new names. Dr. Marr warned us. They will retaliate indirectly. They will call you unstable. They will flood you with lawsuits. They will try to make your story sound like superstition, so evidence feels optional. She was right. Within a week, anonymous accounts posted edited clips of Calder's confession, with captions about moon curses and witch divers, as if ridicule could dissolve contracts. A defamation suit arrived naming me personally, alleging I had coerced witnesses into false statements. Juno wanted to fight physically. Ose wanted to fight online. Dr. Marr wanted to fight in court. I wanted, briefly and dangerously, to fight with the Crescent, to bind every oath those men had ever spoken until their tongues turned into anchors. The Crescent warmed, sensing my temptation. I clenched my fist around it until my nails cut my palm. Not every lie needs you, I whispered. Not every fight is a clause. The stone cooled, almost sulking. Then came the twist that made my mother's warning feel like prophecy. Ezra Pike vanished. One day he was texting me screenshots of internal memos. The next his phone went dead. His safe house apartment was empty except for a bowl of cereal turned stale, as if he'd stepped out and never returned. Dr. Marr's security unit launched a search, but Breakwater City had 1,000 places to hide a human body. Abandoned piers, flooded basements, cargo containers. Juno slammed her fist on my kitchen table. They took him, she said. We should bind them. Ose nodded grimly. Nora chirped. Danger. Unknown actors. My crescent warmed like a heartbeat. The consortium had learned the cost of oaths. Now they would avoid swearing. They would use silence, implication, and unsigned orders. How do you enforce truth against a system that refuses to promise anything? That was the real problem. Clauses bind oaths. Silence slips through. I asked Dr. Marr what she knew about the scarred crescent symbol. She hesitated, then showed me a classified briefing. The Tide Witness Consortium had a subunit called the Scar Crescent Office, responsible for listener management. They didn't just sabotage barriers. They curated narratives, decided which truths surfaced and which drowned. Their tools included oath devices like mine, but theirs were different. Not crescents that listened to the sky, but crescents that listened to enclosed spaces, rooms with skylights, glass domes, atriums. Their crescents could bind oaths made under architecture, not nature. That meant they could trap people in boardrooms, courtrooms, clinics, places where decisions happen. My mother had handed me a wild clause. They had industrial clauses. The thought made me nauseous. Why did my mother have one? I asked. Dr. Marr's eyes softened. Etiquette worked on the barrier early, she said. She refused to sign a non-disclosure oath when contractors tried to hide defects. There was an incident. She survived. We never knew how. I touched my crescent and felt, suddenly, the weight of my mother's rebellion traveling through me like a tide. She had not given me a magical trinket. She had given me a refusal made portable. We needed Ezra, and we needed Harlan. Not for revenge, but because he was the keystone of the spiral plan. Without him, the consortium could pretend sabotage was rogue actors. With him, we could map the whole network. Dr. Marr wanted to use warrants and surveillance. Juno wanted to use crowbars. I had the crescent and the terrible knowledge that an oath, properly shaped, could force a leak. But Harlan would not swear again if he understood the risk, unless someone tempted him with a promise he could not resist. Control. So we designed a trap that relied not on his morality, but on his ego. We arranged a fake auction of a listener artifact through a black market broker we knew from salvage jobs. The broker spread whispers that a second crescent, the scarred kind, had been recovered from the old channel and was for sale. The rumor was bait because Harlan could not allow a rival listener to exist uncontrolled. Control was his religion. The auction was set in a glass conservatory downtown, a venue chosen for its retractable roof. Open sky could be made with a button. Dr. Marr placed commission agents in catering uniforms. Juno and Ose posed as security. I wore my crescent under my collar and tried not to vomit from anxiety. Nora hovered above the conservatory's fountain. her camera eye blinking like a curious bird. At midnight, Harlan arrived. He wore a different coat, but his eyes were the same bored knives. He approached the broker, glanced at the fake artifact case, and said, "I can pay whatever you want. I just need assurance." The broker, playing his role, asked, "Assurance of what?" Harlan smiled thinly. "Assurance that no listener will use it against us," he said. Then he looked directly at the glass roof overhead and said, as if the sky were a witness he could bully, "I swear I will secure every crescent and silence every listener." The crescent on my chest erupted with heat. My hearing dimmed further, as if the claws had already started counting its price. Harlan had sworn a threat, under open sky. It was the worst kind of oath, an intention to erase truth. The claws trembled in hunger. I realized then that invoking it could stop him, but it could also cost me the last of my hearing. I would live in a world of subtitles and vibrations. Was that worth Ezra's life? Was that worth a city's safety? My mother's last advice returned, not as guidance, but as a question. What can you afford to lose? I granted permission anyway, because some costs are unfair and still necessary. I whispered, "Make it heavy." The moment the words left my mouth, the world went nearly silent, as if someone had shut a door on sound. Not total deafness, just a dramatic drop, like diving deep without equalizing. I swayed. Harlan jerked as if struck. His smile vanished. He looked around wildly, then grabbed the broker by the wrist. "Where is it?" he demanded. The broker shook his head, terrified. Harlan's mouth opened, and his voice came out raw, forced by the weight of his own oath. I can't silence," he gasped. "I can't stop listening." His eyes widened in horror, as if he had realized the claws had flipped his intention inside out. He tried to run, but his legs moved sluggishly, as if wading through water. Commission agents surged in, badges flashing. "Doctor," Mar stepped forward and said, "Harlan Silt, you are under arrest for sabotage and kidnapping." Harlan's eyes snapped to me. In that gaze, he recognized a listener. "You," he spat, voice broken. "You're ruining the tide." I wanted to answer, but my own voice sounded distant even to me. I watched as agents cuffed him, and I felt the crescent cool, satisfied, like a predator settling after feeding. The arrest didn't magically locate Ezra, but it cracked open Harlan's control. In interrogation, he refused to speak until Dr. Marr brought him into a courtyard with open sky. She didn't know about the crescent's mechanics. She only knew that sunlight made some people honest. Harlan, cornered, tried one last defense. He swore again that Ezra Pike was safe and that the commission would never find him. My crescent warmed, but I didn't grant permission. I couldn't afford more. Instead, Doctor, Marr did something brilliant and mundane. She offered Harlan a plea deal on the record, demanding he swear to disclose Ezra's location in exchange for reduced charges. Harlan hesitated, then swore because he believed he could outlaw her later. The oath hung in the air like bait. Dr. Marr looked at me, finally understanding something in my face. I shook my head, panicked. "I can't," I mouthed. She read my lips and nodded once, as if accepting a cost she hadn't known existed. Then she stepped closer to Harlan and said, calmly, "If you don't disclose, the deal is void." Harlan's eyes narrowed. He had sworn. The sky heard him. Even without my claws, a sworn statement on the record became a trap in court. He cracked not because of magic, but because of procedure. He gave the location. A storage complex by the rail yards, Unit B-19. The commission raided it. Ezra was there, alive, dazed, dehydrated, but alive. When he saw me, he cried silently. I cried too, but I couldn't hear my own sobs. Tears are quieter than you expect when your ears are gone. Breakwater City celebrated again. Politicians held speeches about resilience. They swore to rebuild oversight. The crescent warmed whenever they swore, and I kept my hands off it. I had learned that a clause is not the same as justice. It is a lever. A lever can lift a boulder, but it can also crush your fingers. My hearing never fully returned after the conservatory. I adapted. I learned to feel sound through surfaces, the thump of bass through floorboards, the tremor of engines through hulls, the pattern of waves against pilings. Juno learned to sign crude dockhand gestures that became our shared language. Osei developed a habit of narrating with exaggerated facial expressions, and sometimes I could tell he was swearing by the shape of his mouth even if I couldn't hear the word. Nora's chirps became light patterns on her casing, a kindness she invented for me. The world was still full of lies. It was also full of people who wanted to do better and didn't always know how. I stopped trying to bind the entire world. I started building redundancy. Data backups, whistleblower-safe routes, public dashboards of barrier stress points, community monitoring crews. We wrote new clauses the old way, through policy, through documentation, through neighbors who refused to be gaslit by official calm. The trial phase was where the consortium tried to survive by turning truth into a nuisance. Their attorneys filed motions like nets, to delay, to dismiss, to seal. They tried to reframe sabotage as innovative stress testing, kidnapping as protective custody, and Harlan's spiral plan as an unfortunate internal brainstorming exercise. In one hearing, a corporate counsel named Marlo Quince stood beneath the courthouse atrium skylight and said, very carefully, "We categorically deny any intentional weakening of the barrier, and I swear no evidence exists of coordinated misconduct." The crescent warmed, but I held still. Doctor, Mars prosecutors didn't need magic. They had Harlan's own data dump, Ezra's testimony, and physical traces of the Skyline resonator on seized barges. Yet the defense kept attempting a different kind of sabotage, exhausting everyone until attention drifted. That's how most wrongdoing survives, by waiting longer than outrage can breathe. When the judge asked whether the consortium would agree to independent monitoring of future barrier repairs, Marlo smiled and said, "We welcome oversight. No oath." The consortium learned to avoid swearing. They spoke in polished non-commitments, in words that sounded like promises but were engineered to float. The crescent stayed cool, as if bored. I realized then that the clause could not replace civic stamina. If a system stops swearing, the clause loses leverage, and the rest is just the slow work of people refusing to look away. Ezra Pike testified behind a privacy screen because the consortium's online fans had started posting his childhood photos with captions calling him a traitor. He spoke in a voice that shook, and I read his lips from the gallery because my hearing couldn't catch every syllable. He described the spiral plan, the shell companies, the way the Skyline resonator crews were scheduled like ordinary maintenance shifts. The defense tried to smear him as unstable. Ezra looked at the judge and said, without swearing, "I am afraid, but I am not confused." That sentence landed heavier than any oath. When cross-examined, he admitted he had once signed an internal integrity pledge that required employees to swear confidentiality under natural witness. The pledge language made my crescent warm faintly, like an old bruise. Ezra said, "They taught us that the sky watches, but only when it benefits them. When the sky watches them, they call it superstition." The judge's face tightened. Even people trained to be neutral dislike hypocrisy when it is that naked. Outside the courthouse, activists built an improvised truth canopy from sailcloth and solar film. A public space where anyone could share evidence without microphones controlled by donors. Under the canopy, people told stories of flooded basements, denied insurance claims, and emergency repairs that always went to the same contractors. They didn't swear, they documented. They posted receipts, photos, timestamps, audio clips. The canopy became a living archive, a place where the city practiced truth as an action rather than a vow. Watching it, I felt something loosen in my chest. For months I had feared my crescent was the only tool that could make oaths matter. The canopy proved otherwise. The city could make truth heavy by carrying it together. My claws had been a lever. Their archive was a foundation. That distinction mattered, because foundations don't charge your senses as interest. The consortium's last gambit was subtle, and, in its own way, brilliant. They attempted to weaponize a scarred crescent against me. One evening as I locked up the dock office, a small package waited on my desk. No return label, sealed with a triangle sticker. Inside was a second crescent, milky, thin, almost identical to mine except for a hairline groove cut across its curve. It looked like a moon with a scar. Tucked beneath it was a note. "If you can't hear, you can't testify. Swear you'll wear this, and we'll restore what you lost." My stomach flipped. A bargain wrapped in a promise of restoration. The crescent on my chest warmed, wary. I held the scarred crescent between thumb and forefinger and felt a faint vibration, like a device waiting for activation. It wasn't listening to the sky. It was listening to me. It wanted my oath. It wanted to bind me into silence by making me swear to accept their help. I set it on the table and wrote 3 words on a sheet of paper. I do not swear. Then I sealed the scarred crescent in an evidence bag and handed it to Dr. Marr the next morning. When she asked how I knew it was a trap, I tapped my chest, then my notebook, then the canopy photos on her tablet. I didn't need to hear their promises to recognize their shape. Years later, on a clear night when the barrier lights flickered in a steady rhythm like a heartbeat the city could finally trust, Dr. Marr visited my boat. She handed me a thin folder. Inside was an old maintenance log with my mother's signature and a note in her handwriting. If they make you swear, step into the open. Let the sky hear you first. Beneath the note was a sketch of a crescent. I stared until my eyes blurred. My mother had been a listener before me. She had chosen her costs. She had chosen to pass the clause not as a weapon, but as a refusal to let oaths become decorations for harm. I went to the deck, looked up at the sky, and spoke not swore into the salt air. I'm still here, I said. My voice was small, and I barely heard it, but the sky didn't need my hearing. It only needed me to mean the words. The crescent rested against my chest, cool and quiet, listening to the city's promises without demanding I spend myself on every one. The sea kept rising, because physics does not care about morals. But at least now Breakwater City had something stronger than slogans, records, monitors, and people who understood that the heaviest truth is the one you build together, not the one you force out of a liar at the cost of your own senses.